Good morning, comic book fans. Welcome back to Comics in 5 Minutes. I'm your own host, Shorty, and today we're going to be looking at Death Dealer, specifically Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer, which up until fairly recently was just a cool picture of a dude on a horse. But Opus Comics, with the help of the Frazetta girls, is making it into a comic book series. In fact, make it into a Frank Frazetta universe, shared universe kind of thing, because everyone needs a shared universe right now. And there's a couple of things I like about this, a couple of things I don't. But first off, it's probably worth saying that the biggest thing it's reminded of recently that I've read has been Hawk and Slayer. So if you want some thoughts on like cool fantasy stuff with like a kind of vintage feel to it, go and check out my review of Hawk the Slayer first, then come back here and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So Hawk the Slayer is basically carrying on the story from an old movie, which is kind of dated and looks kind of bad by today's standards, but it's still a cool story. Death Deal is effectively inventing an entire world for a character who, as I say, was a painting of this ominous guy on a horse. That dude. In fact, I think there is, the cover B, which you can get, actually is the original painting, I think, by Frazetta. And there's a reason why it kind of deserved to be in its own comic book. It's a very popular piece of artwork. It's one thing that, like, if you say Frank Frazetta, that's one thing most people think about. But they had this opportunity to do something really bold and kind of create its own mythology. And unfortunately, it stays true to an awful lot of classic tropes. Fantasy noir kind of stuff. Get what I mean? It's a very, very dark. It even verges into horror at some point, which I think is really quite cool. But it also feels kind of juvenile. And it's not necessarily an insult to call it that. It just feels like it is embracing the kind of mind that would have watched something like Hawk the Slayer when they were a kid, and has maintained that that is what fantasy should be. Like also Legend to a certain degree, and maybe even Lady Hawk, or some of the more grown-up sword and sorcery kind of comic books. There's an awful lot of Conan in here. There's also quite a lot of Driss the Slayer, and whoever the guy is. It's like, whoever it is who has like a cursed sword, Elric, I think, of Melnibone. But that kind of like cursed artifact driving somebody on to do dark deeds, that is such a kind of standard trope within fantasy that when you start with that as the main thing, like the guy on the horse is the person, Death Dealer is the helmet, which he is cursed to wear at all times, and sometimes takes over and gives him the superhuman strength and abilities, but is gradually taking his soul to do it. So he's planning on killing himself so he doesn't have to live this life. This so far is just so standard fantasy. But I like the fact that they lean into it to a certain degree, because you also get like the first proper female character. There is somebody at the beginning who's kind of there just as set dressing, but the first female character you get that the main character interacts with is voluptuous, buxom redhead wearing clothes drastically inappropriate for where she is. And one of the first shots you get to her is very much of her bending over, revealing quite a lot of backside, who then you realize can cast magical spells, which again is very on point for classic fantasy or fantasy noir tropes. Has a child who's almost certainly going to be some kind of chosen one that some dark evil force is trying to chase. You do see the dark evil force beginning, and it's a really nice bit of horror actually in it, because fantasy noir can go very, very dark. This one leans definitely more into the medieval fantasy setting, but the character artwork is fantastic, and the effects it has on the world are gory and gruesome. I love it to pieces. But this back to the woman who has this child, who's almost at the mum because she's breastfeeding it, so she would be pregnant at some point, but has sex with the main character, Death Dealer, literally as soon as she's able to, on more than one occasion, in fact, and then disappears at the end, and his job is now to go and find her. This is just hitting all the kind of trope buttons you expect it to, and it's not really going outside of its comfort zone. I don't particularly think this is necessarily a bad thing. It is leaning into it. It's like the intent is to have done this kind of story. So the fact that it has done it can't really be criticized too heavily. I do hope that it does something different. I hope that it kind of grabs hold of the idea that this is a unique thing they're doing. Well, not unique. It is an original thing they're doing, original character that hasn't really had a story told before, so they can do what they like with it. They don't have to follow this path, or they are just going to absolutely lean into it and grab hold of every single thing that the kind of people who would have had a Death Dealer poster on their bedroom wall as a kid would want out of a fantasy story. And it looks like that's exactly what they're going to do. Before I talk about the artwork, it is fantastic. It really captures the time or the place and presence of what's going on. The action sequences are brilliant, almost delirious sometimes with the actions going on. I like the magic effects, and I like the underground work. I like the costume designs and the creature designs. Basically, it looks like an absolutely brilliant bit of fantasy artwork, absolutely through and through, and that marries very, very nicely with the story they're telling. I hope they do something more with it, but I honestly can't criticize them if they don't. That's it for me today, though. I'll be back tomorrow with another review. Until then, look after each other, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.